What's that one story in your life that ends with, I should have died that day? My doorbell rang at 2 a.m., and through the peephole, I saw my neighbor's kid, maybe 16, with blood on his face. Please, Mr. Johnson. My dad's gonna kill my mom. She's locked in the basement. I threw open the door immediately. Lyle stood there shaking, nose bleeding, eye swelling shut. This kid was like family. Oh my God, Lyle! Get inside! No, there's no time! She's screaming. Listen! I could hear it, desperate yelling from their house. A woman's voice, then a crash like furniture breaking. I'm calling 911 right now. Don't! Lyle screamed. You know my dad's a corrections officer. His buddies will show up and say it's nothing. It happened before. They said Mom was hysterical and left. Please, Mr. Johnson. You're the only one who ever stands up to him. Another scream followed. I'd heard their fights through the walls for months, each one getting worse. Where is he now? Upstairs loading his guns. He thinks I ran to my friend's house. He said tonight he's ending everything. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone, my baseball bat, and my car keys. We get your mom and drive straight to the hospital. They have to report it. Lyle sobbed with relief. The basement door's padlocked. I know where he keeps bolt cutters. We ran through Lyle's backyard. I'd been in their garage before, helping fix bikes. Now it looked like a war zone, holes punched in drywall, broken furniture, shattered glass. Jesus, Lyle, how long has this been going on? Since Mom filed for divorce last week. It's getting worse every day. Heavy footsteps paced upstairs. Then a sound I recognized from my time in the service, ammunition being loaded. The basement door was padlocked shut. A woman crying came from below. Mrs. Kimberly? It's Vic Johnson. We're getting you out. Vic? Oh God, thank you. He's lost it. He's completely lost it. I attacked the lock with the bolt cutters. Almost there. Stay back from the door. The lock finally snapped. Mrs. Kimberly stumbled out. Bruised face, split lip, her wrist bent at an odd angle. We have to go now, she gasped. He said he's going to burn it all down. Make it look like I did it. He has gasoline. Her voice was interrupted by footsteps thumping on the stairs. Back door, I whispered. We ran and made it to my car. But as I started the engine, Lyle's dad appeared in the doorway with a rifle. Lyle, get back here! I floored it, but he fired, and my back windshield exploded. Mrs. Kimberly was sobbing. The warehouse on Watersfield. That's where he said he'd do it. Where no one would hear. Do what? Kill us both and make it look like I murdered Lyle and took my life. He's got it all planned. I found the fake Sewerslide note he wrote from me. That's when an unknown number rang my phone. I didn't want to answer it, but some sort of weird feeling washed over me. I answered and put the phone on speaker. Mr. Johnson. His voice was calm. Too calm. You just kidnapped my family. We're going to the police. No, you're not. I have something you need to see. A text came through. Security footage from a house. My daughter Bella, coming home from her late shift at the hospital. Timestamp. Tonight, 1:45 a.m. Pretty girl. Lives alone since her divorce, doesn't she? You know, one of my buddies actually lives on her block. It would be a shame if he paid her a visit. My blood went ice cold. If someone touches her, you'll do nothing. The warehouse in Watersfield. In 20 minutes. Just you and my family. Or a convicted arpist visits Bella. That's when the line went dead. Mrs. Kimberly grabbed my arm. Vic, no. He's insane. I'm not leaving my daughter to die. I was already turning toward Watersfield. Lyle, call 911. Tell them everything. Give them the warehouse address. Lyle was crying. He'll kill you. Maybe. But more cops will show up if there's already been shots fired. I looked at Mrs. Kimberly in the mirror. When we get there, you both stay in the car. Doors locked. Anyone but me approaches. You drive away. The warehouse loomed ahead with only one truck in the lot. Remember, I said. Engine running. Ready to go. I grabbed my bat and walked toward the entrance. The warehouse door was open. Darkness inside except for a camping lantern in the center. Mr. Kimberly sat on a crate, rifle across his lap. Gasoline cans surrounding him. Vic, you always were a hero type. Let this end here, Kimberly. Your family's safe. I'm here. He laughed. You think you saved them? You have no idea what you've done. He stood up, kicked over one of the gas cans. Liquid spread across the floor. See, I was going to make this clean. Murder Sewerslide. Tragic, but simple. But now you're involved. Now it's complicated. The cops are coming. Good. They'll find a corrections officer who caught his wife's lover helping her kidnap their son. He held up his phone. Amazing what AI can do with doorbell footage these days. That's definitely you kissing my wife in my kitchen last week. That's not real. Doesn't matter. You're here. Your prints are in my house. You took them into your car. He sparked a match. I heard sirens, but they were still far away. You won't hurt Lyle. Lyle isn't my son. His eyes were dead. I found out last week. 15 years of raising another man's kid. He dropped the flare. The gasoline ignited instantly. Fire spreading between me and the door. Kimberly raised the rifle. You wanted to be the hero, Vic. Behind him, I saw movement. Lyle and his mom hadn't stayed in the car. They were creeping through the smoke behind Kimberly, staying low to the ground. My stomach dropped because they were walking right into danger. I couldn't warn them without letting him know they were there. The smoke was getting thicker, and they moved between stacks of old pallets. Kimberly kept the rifle pointed at me while the fire spread wider across the floor. I waved my hands down low, trying to signal them to get lower. My movements made Kimberly's eyes narrow, and he started turning his head. The rifle barrel began tracking toward where they were hiding behind some wooden crates. I had to do something fast to keep his attention on me. "Wait, what about Bella?" I said quickly. "Your whole plan needs me alive to make that trade work." He stopped turning and looked back at me. That gave Lyle and his mom a few seconds to duck behind better cover. They pressed themselves against a concrete pillar as the smoke swirled around them. The fire was spreading faster now and getting closer to where they were hiding. A loud scraping sound came from behind the crates. Lyle's foot had slipped on the wet concrete floor. Kimberly spun around instantly and fired without even aiming. The bullet hit the floor right near my leg, and concrete chips flew up. They tore through my jeans and into my calf like hot needles. Blood started soaking through the fabric immediately. While he was looking at where the sound came from, I swung my bat as hard as I could. The wood cracked against the rifle barrel with a loud bang. He shoved me backward with his shoulder, and I slipped in the spreading gasoline. My injured leg gave out, and I went down hard on the concrete. Pain shot up from my calf, and my elbow hit the floor. The bat went flying out of my hands and rolled away into the darkness. Kimberly swung the rifle back toward me, but kept glancing around. The sirens were getting much louder now, maybe 2 blocks away at most. Red and blue lights were starting to flash through the warehouse windows. Kimberly pulled out his phone and started typing something quickly. "Hostage situation," he muttered while typing. My buddy knows what to say. My blood went cold because I knew what that meant. His cop friends would control the story when they got here. I had to get evidence of what was really happening. My phone was in my pocket, and I fumbled for it without looking away from him. I managed to start the voice recording app by Feel Alone. "So tell me about this plan of yours," I said loudly. "The fake note you wrote, the insurance money, all of it." He looked at me with those dead eyes and actually smiled. "You want to know how smart I am?" he asked. "I've been planning this for weeks." He started talking about the life insurance policies he'd taken out, how he'd studied other cases to make it look real. The recording was picking up his voice even through the smoke and noise. He explained how the note would make it look like his wife killed Lyle first. Then she'd burn the place down with herself inside out of guilt. Nobody would question a corrections officer's story, he said, especially with my friends backing me up. The smoke was getting so thick I could barely see across the warehouse. I spotted Lyle trying to guide his mom toward a side door, but flames had already spread there and blocked their path completely. They were coughing hard with their shirts pulled up over their faces. They turned and started searching for another way out, but the fire kept spreading. I saw a fire alarm pull station on the wall about 10 feet away. I pushed myself up and lunged for it, yanking the handle down hard. The alarm started screaming immediately, adding to the chaos in the warehouse. The sound was so loud it hurt my ears, but it would help. Emergency services would know exactly where we were now and send more help. Kimberly raised the rifle and shot the camping lantern without warning. Glass shattered, and suddenly we were in near darkness. Only the red emergency lights from the alarm system gave us any light. They flashed on and off, making everything look like a nightmare. Shadows jumped with each flash, and I couldn't tell where anyone was. In the strobing light, I caught glimpses of Kimberly moving toward where Lyle and his mom were trapped. They were backed against a wall now with fire on 2 sides. The smoke was so thick, they could barely stand up straight. I tried to get up, but my leg wouldn't hold my weight. Blood was pooling under me and making the floor slippery. Every time the light flashed, I saw a different frozen image. Kimberly raising the rifle, Lyle shielding his mom with his body, fire climbing up the walls, smoke pouring out of broken windows. The whole place was turning into an inferno, and we were all trapped inside. More sirens joined the first ones, and I heard car doors slamming outside. Voices shouted commands, but I couldn't make out the words over the alarm. The smoke was making it hard to breathe, and my eyes were burning. I dragged myself toward where I'd last seen Lyle and his mom. Every movement sent pain shooting through my leg, but I had to help them. The recording on my phone was still going, capturing everything that was happening. I spotted them through the smoke near the back wall and shouted for them to get down and crawl toward the loading dock. The smoke was thicker up high, so we all dropped to our bellies on the cold concrete. I could taste the gasoline fumes burning my throat as we crawled through puddles of fuel toward what looked like an exit. My hands kept slipping on the wet floor, and broken glass cut through my jeans. Lyle was coughing so hard he could barely move, but he kept pulling his mom forward. The heat was getting worse, and I could hear wood cracking above us. Outside, patrol cars screeched into the parking lot with sirens blaring and red lights flashing through the smoke. Officers started shouting commands through megaphones, but then everything got quiet for a second. Through a broken window, I saw Kimberly flash his corrections badge at the first officer who approached. The cop's whole body language changed when he recognized him, and I heard him asking what was really happening here. His voice sounded confused and uncertain, like he didn't know what to believe. I crawled toward the warehouse door and threw my bat as far away as I could before putting my hands up high. The officers had their weapons drawn, but they kept looking between me and Kimberly, like they weren't sure who the threat was. I yelled that there was an arsonist with a rifle inside who had tried to kill his family. 2 officers exchanged looks, and one started to lower his weapon slightly. Before I could say more, Kimberly shouted that I had kidnapped his wife and son and set the warehouse on fire. He said I was the one they needed to arrest, and that he'd been trying to stop me. The officer who knew him started nodding, and his gun barrel began swinging toward me. I saw his finger move to the trigger, and my whole body tensed up. Right then, Lyle burst out of the smoke behind me, coughing and gagging so hard he threw up on the pavement. He was screaming between breaths that his dad had locked them in the basement and tried to burn them alive. The officer's weapon started moving back and forth between us, while Lyle kept yelling about the padlock and the gasoline. Mrs. Kimberly stumbled out next, barely able to stand with her wrist hanging at that weird angle. Her face was so swollen and bloody that one officer immediately called for medical help. The EMTs rushed forward with their bags, while more sirens announced backup units pulling into the lot. They wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and started checking her injuries while she sobbed about the fake note. A dark sedan pulled up, and Detective Gabrielle Walker stepped out, taking in the whole scene in seconds. She had that calm authority that made everyone stop and listen when she started giving orders. She told the patrol units to establish a perimeter around the warehouse and get the fire department positioned for entry. Nobody questioned her, even though some of the officers clearly outranked her. She separated all of us for quick statements, putting us in different patrol cars so we couldn't hear each other. When she got to me, she noticed my phone was still in my hand with the screen showing it was recording. Her eyes got sharp with interest, and she carefully took it from me using gloves. She bagged it as evidence and said, "This could be the most important thing we had." I told her to play the audio from inside the warehouse where Kimberly had been talking. The sound was muffled by my pocket, but you could still hear him explaining his plan about the fake note. Some words came through clear like insurance and make it look like she did it in his voice. She made notes on her tablet and called someone about getting the audio enhanced immediately. From inside the warehouse, we could hear metal scraping on concrete like shelving being pushed around. Kimberly's voice echoed out through the smoke, yelling that he had more gasoline and would blow the whole place if anyone tried to come in. The fire chief pulled his team back immediately and started talking to Gabrielle about containment protocols. I watched them setting up a command post while my leg throbbed where the concrete chips had torn through my calf earlier. Blood was soaking through my jeans, but I couldn't leave until I knew this was over. Gabrielle came back with more questions about the threat to my daughter, and I showed her the texts on my phone. She immediately got on her radio and dispatched units to Bella's address with specific instructions about checking for suspicious vehicles. The relief when they confirmed no signs of trouble made my knees go weak, but something still felt wrong about that video he'd sent. The timestamp looked off, and the lighting didn't match what the weather had been at that time tonight. More emergency vehicles kept arriving, and the scene turned into controlled chaos with different agencies coordinating their response. Gabrielle never lost her focus, though, methodically building the case while managing the crisis. She had patrol units checking on every corrections officer who might be connected to Kimberly's threats. The way she operated reminded me of good commanders I'd known in the service, keeping everyone on task despite the madness around us. I grabbed Gabrielle's arm and pulled out my phone to show her the texts about Bella. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unlock the screen, but I managed to pull up the messages and the video of my daughter coming home from her hospital shift. Gabrielle's face went hard when she read the part about the corrections officer Buddy living on Bella's block, and she immediately got on her radio calling for units to get to that address right now. She wrote down everything in her notebook while barking orders into the radio, and I heard her say something about possible accomplice and witness intimidation. My phone was already dialing Bella, but it went straight to voicemail, which made my stomach drop. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady and used our old family code word from when she was little, the one we made up after her mom died that meant drop everything and call me immediately. I told her police were coming to protect her and to call 911 right away if she saw anything weird. The smoke from the warehouse was getting thicker and making me cough, so hard I could barely stand up straight. An EMT came over and saw the blood soaking through my jeans where the concrete chips had torn into my calf and started pulling me toward the ambulance. I pushed him away and said I wasn't going anywhere until I knew what was happening here. He pointed at my leg and said something about needing stitches, but I just pressed my hand against the wound to slow the bleeding and stayed put. My phone buzzed with another unknown number, and when I opened it, there was a new video of Bella's apartment building with a timestamp from just 3 minutes ago. Something looked wrong though because the streetlight in the video was on, But I remembered Bella complaining last week that it had been broken for a month. I showed it to Gabrielle, and she studied it on her tablet while more emergency vehicles kept arriving. Her radio crackled, and a voice said they had units at Bella's address with no signs of trouble, and they were maintaining position outside the building. The relief hit me so hard, my knees actually buckled, and I had to grab onto a patrol car to stay upright. But something still felt wrong about that video. My phone rang, and it was Kimberly's number showing on the screen. I put it on speaker so Gabrielle could hear, and his voice came through sounding smug as he talked about the evidence he had of me and his wife together. Another message came through with clearer footage of what looked like me kissing Mrs. Kimberly in their kitchen, and even though I knew it was fake, it looked really convincing. Gabrielle took my phone and pulled up the video on her tablet where she could zoom in, and she pointed at weird, blurry edges around the figures that didn't match the background. She made notes about digital artifacts and metadata preservation, and called someone about getting their tech unit to analyze it immediately. Through the speaker, we heard Kimberly moving around inside the warehouse, and then he was yelling that I better come back inside alone, or he'd light another gas trail he'd set up. His voice sounded different now, more desperate and less controlled, like he was starting to realize his whole plan was falling apart. Gabrielle looked at me and shook her head, but I was already saying I'd go back in if it meant ending this without anyone else getting hurt. She pulled me aside and said if I was really going to do this stupid thing, then I was wearing a wire, and she started setting me up with a small microphone. Her hands were steady as she taped it to my chest under my shirt and explained the safe words and extraction signals they'd use if things went bad. My hands were shaking as she finished taping the wire and gave me final instructions about keeping him talking and trying to get him to admit to his plans on tape. I walked back toward the warehouse entrance where smoke was still pouring out, and I could see the glow of flames inside getting brighter. The doorway looked like the mouth of hell with orange light dancing in the darkness, and I had to force myself to keep walking forward. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and gas fumes, and I could barely see Kimberly standing near the back wall with his rifle. I started talking loud enough for the wire to pick up and asked him about the insurance policies I'd heard him mention earlier. He actually smiled at that and started bragging about how he'd planned everything perfectly with double indemnity clauses and forged documents. He pulled out papers from his pocket and waved them around, talking about the suicide note he'd written in his wife's handwriting and how he'd practiced for weeks to get it right. The pride in his voice as he explained his plan made me sick, but I kept him talking and steered him toward more details about the insurance money and what he planned to do after. He was getting more animated now and talking about how he deserved compensation for raising another man's kid for 15 years and how the insurance would set him up for life. He walked over to the electrical box on the wall and pulled back a metal panel to show me the gas-soaked rags he'd stuffed behind the wiring. His face had this sick pride as he explained how he'd learned this exact setup from arson investigation training videos they showed at the department. The rags were packed tight against the main breaker, and I could smell the fumes from where I stood 20 feet away. He kept talking about accelerant patterns and burn rates, while I slowly shifted my weight and kicked one of the gas cans with my heel. The metal scraped against concrete as it slid away from us and created a small gap in the puddle of fuel spreading across the floor. I kept my movements small and tried to look like I was just adjusting my stance while the can rolled toward a drain grate. His phone started buzzing, and he answered it without taking his eyes off me or lowering the rifle. I could hear a man's voice through the speaker asking about the situation, and Kimberly started giving coordinates and describing me as the aggressor. He actually smiled while explaining how I'd broken into his house and kidnapped his family, and now he had me cornered at the warehouse. The voice on the other end was agreeing with everything and promising to back up whatever story Kimberly needed. Through my earpiece, I heard Gabrielle's voice telling me to keep him talking because help was coming. A few minutes later, I saw headlights sweep across the warehouse windows and heard car doors slamming outside. Kimberly tensed up and raised the rifle higher, but then relaxed when he saw the state police markings on the vehicle through the smoke. Sergeant Gerard Gray's voice boomed through a megaphone identifying himself and ordering everyone to exit the building immediately. Gabrielle must have called him specifically to avoid any local cops who might be friends with Kimberly. The smoke was getting thicker, and my eyes were burning as Kimberly pulled out his phone again and held it up toward me. He told me to confess right now that I'd been having an affair with his wife, and that's why I helped her escape. I shook my head and spoke loud enough for the wire to pick up that I only helped because Lyle came to my door bleeding and begged me to save his mother from being murdered. Kimberly's face went dark red, and he swung the rifle stock at my head like a club. The wood cracked against my skull and sent me stumbling backward into a stack of pallets. Stars exploded in my vision, and I felt warm blood running down behind my ear as I tried to stay on my feet. The body mic would have picked up the impact, and his voice screaming at me to admit to something that never happened. The fire had spread to the main exit now, and orange flames were climbing up the doorframe while black smoke poured out into the night. Through the haze, I saw a firefighter's shape appear in the doorway with a hose, but Kimberly immediately swung the rifle toward them. I yelled for them to get back, and the figure disappeared as Kimberly tracked them with the barrel. My head was pounding and blood was dripping onto my shirt, but I tried one more time to reach whatever was left of the man he used to be. I reminded him that he was a corrections officer who was supposed to protect people and keep them safe. For just a second, his face softened and the rifle lowered a few inches, but then his jaw clenched again. He started ranting about Lyle not being his real son and how 15 years of his life had been stolen from him. That's when Lyle's voice cut through the smoke from somewhere outside, and I heard him shouting that he'd asked for a DNA test months ago. He was crying and yelling that he'd wanted to know the truth, but his mom had refused to let him get tested. It was the first time I'd heard him admit he knew there were questions about who his real father was. Kimberly's phone lit up with texts, and he turned it toward me to show messages from someone labeled as his union rep. The messages were about filing assault charges against me and claiming I'd attacked an officer in the performance of his duties. He was actually laughing while showing me how they were already working on counter-complaints and paperwork to flip the whole situation. The corruption was right there on the screen, with timestamps showing they'd been planning this cover story for the last 20 minutes. More sirens were getting closer, and I could hear Gerard Gray on the megaphone again, ordering Kimberly to put down the weapon and exit the building. The state police were setting up a perimeter, and I saw flashlight beams cutting through the smoke as they took positions around the warehouse. Kimberly kept waving his phone at me and bragging about how the union would protect him no matter what happened tonight. He said they'd done it before for other officers, and they'd make sure I was the one who ended up in prison for kidnapping and assault. The smoke was so thick now, I could barely see him 10 feet away, and my lungs felt like they were full of broken glass with every breath. That's when new headlights cut through the smoke outside, and I heard car doors slamming hard. A man's voice boomed through a megaphone telling everyone to stand down and step back from the warehouse, and I recognized the authority in that tone from my military days. Through the haze, I saw uniforms moving and heard someone yelling about state police taking over the scene. Kimberly's face went dark as he realized his local buddies weren't running things anymore. The shift was instant, like watching a bully realize the principal just walked in. Gerard Gray's voice carried through the smoke, ordering all corrections officers to move back behind the perimeter line immediately. I could hear arguing outside, someone protesting about jurisdiction, but Gray shut them down fast. Kimberly was still holding the rifle, but his confidence was cracking as he watched his backup plan fall apart. Through the smoke, I saw Gabrielle on her phone, pacing near the warehouse entrance while talking fast to someone. She had her notebook out and was writing while she talked, her free hand making sharp gestures as she explained the situation. I heard her say something about emergency warrants and probable cause for the warehouse search. Kimberly must have heard it too, because he started backing toward the far wall, dragging the rifle with him. The fire was spreading along the gas trail he'd poured earlier, eating up the wooden pallets stacked against the walls. My eyes were burning so bad I could barely keep them open, but I saw Gabrielle give a thumbs up to someone outside. She'd gotten whatever approval she needed because suddenly, everything shifted into high gear. Tactical officers started moving into position around the warehouse doors, their shapes visible through the smoke like ghosts. Someone yelled clear commands about non-lethal force being authorized, and I saw the first officer raise what looked like a beanbag gun. Kimberly swung the rifle toward them, but before he could aim properly, the beanbag round caught him square in the shoulder. The impact spun him sideways, and he stumbled, trying to keep his grip on the rifle while his whole right side went numb. I didn't think, just moved, kicking hard at the rifle barrel while he was off balance. My foot connected and the rifle swung wide, but he held on, using the stock to slam into my ribs. We both went down in the spreading fuel, rolling and sliding on the slick concrete. My hands found the rifle barrel, and I pulled hard, feeling the metal edges cut into my palms. Blood made everything slippery as we fought for control, neither of us able to get good footing in the gas. His phone fell out of his pocket and landed near a puddle of water from a leaking pipe. Without thinking, I grabbed it and dunked it in the water, trying to destroy whatever fake evidence he had on there. Through the earpiece they'd given me earlier, Gabrielle's voice crackled urgently, telling me to stop, that they needed that phone intact for evidence. But it was too late. The phone was already soaked. Kimberly roared and tackled me from behind, his full weight slamming me into the concrete. I felt something in my shoulder give way with a horrible pop, and white-hot pain shot down my whole arm. The world went sideways and dark at the edges as I fought to stay conscious, my shoulder feeling like it was on fire from the inside. Everything was swimming, and I couldn't tell which way was up anymore. That's when I heard running footsteps, and Lyle appeared through the smoke carrying a fire blanket from one of the emergency stations. This kid who'd been shaking with fear just an hour ago was now running straight into danger, throwing the blanket over my back as flames got closer to where I was lying. The heat on my legs eased up, and I could breathe a little better under the blanket's protection. Kimberly had gotten the rifle back and was bringing it up toward Lyle, his finger on the trigger, but he froze, staring at the boy he'd raised for 15 years, the kid who'd called him dad even after learning the truth. That split second of hesitation was all the tactical team needed. They rushed in from 3 directions at once, moving with the kind of precision that comes from endless training. One officer knocked the rifle up and away, while another swept Kimberly's legs, bringing him down hard on his face. They had him in cuffs before he could even process what was happening. 2 officers holding him down, while a third secured his hands behind his back. Even with his face pressed into the concrete and his hands cuffed, Kimberly was still fighting, still trying to control things. He was screaming about being set up, about his rights being violated, about how his union would destroy all of us in court. He promised lawsuits against everyone from me to the state police, swearing his brothers in corrections would back him up no matter what. The desperation in his voice was almost worse than his earlier calm, as he kept insisting this was all a conspiracy against him. They dragged him toward the warehouse door, his boots scraping on the concrete as he twisted and fought against the officers holding him. Even as they pulled him through the smoke toward the waiting patrol cars, he was still yelling about how we'd all pay for this, how his lawyer would tear us apart, how the union would make sure he walked free. His need to control the story, to be the victim instead of the criminal, continued even as they stuffed him into the back of the patrol car. The smoke was clearing now as firefighters moved in with their hoses, dousing the flames and washing away the gasoline. The EMTs were suddenly all over me, checking my shoulder that was still screaming with pain from when it popped out. They loaded me onto a stretcher, even though I kept insisting I could walk on my own. My leg was bleeding pretty bad through my jeans where the concrete chips had torn into it. The whole scene was chaos, with firefighters spraying down the last of the flames and evidence teams already starting to bag things up. I could see them putting yellow markers next to the gas cans and taking photos of everything. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading fast, and suddenly I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Every part of my body hurt, and my hands were shaking, so bad I couldn't hold the water bottle the EMT gave me. They wheeled me past where they had Mrs. Kimberly on another stretcher with her wrist in a temporary splint. Lyle was sitting in the back of an ambulance with a blanket around his shoulders, looking completely lost. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens, and the EMT asking me questions about what hurt and if I had any medical conditions. At the emergency room, everything moved fast, with nurses cutting my jeans off to get at the wounds on my leg. A social worker named Lorraine Budd showed up and went straight to Mrs. Kimberly and Lyle in the next room. I could see her through the doorway being really gentle with them while she took photos of their injuries with a tablet. She was asking Mrs. Kimberly questions and writing everything down in some kind of official form. Lyle was crying again, and she put her hand on his shoulder while she talked to him. Detective Gabrielle Walker came in while the doctor was putting stitches in my leg, and the pain made me grip the bed rail hard. She had my phone in an evidence bag and was asking me about the recording I'd made. I told her to play it back, and you could hear Kimberly talking about the fake note, even though it was muffled. She was writing everything down in a notebook and asking me to repeat certain parts to make sure she got it right. She took photos of my shoulder and the cuts on my hands from when we fought over the rifle. My phone started buzzing in the evidence bag, and Gabrielle looked at the screen, then handed it to me. It was Bella calling, and my hands were shaking as I answered it. She said she was okay, but scared because she'd seen a sedan driving by her place earlier. That made her nervous. The patrol car was still outside her window, and the officers had checked her whole apartment to make sure it was safe. She wanted to come to the hospital, but I told her to stay put until we knew for sure all of Kimberly's friends were accounted for. Gabrielle took my phone back and said their tech team needed to look at it right away. About an hour later, she came back with news that made my stomach turn in a good way for once. They'd found a deepfake app on Kimberly's phone, along with all the edited videos he'd made. The metadata showed they were all created on his device, and not from any real security camera. She said ADA Eric Stanton was already working on charges for attempted murder and witness intimidation based on what they'd found. I thought things were finally looking up, but then 2 officers showed up and said I needed to come to the station for more questions. The corrections union had filed a complaint saying I'd assaulted one of their officers, and they needed my statement. Gabrielle looked mad, but said she couldn't stop them from following their procedures. They didn't cuff me, but made it clear I wasn't free to leave either. At the station, I sat in an interview room for what felt like hours before a woman walked in carrying a briefcase. Robin Emery introduced herself as my attorney and said Gabrielle had called her to make sure I had representation. She went through everything with me and told me not to talk to anyone about the case, not even friends or family. She took photos of all my injuries with her phone and made copies of the audio recording for our defense. She said the union was going to push hard, but we had enough evidence to fight back. While we were talking, Sergeant Gerard Gray from the state police knocked and came in. He said he was opening investigations into any local officers who might have helped Kimberly or ignored previous complaints. Robin told me later that having state police involved was huge because the local cops couldn't sweep it under the rug anymore. Over the next few hours, I gave my statement 3 different times to different people while Robin sat next to me making sure they didn't try anything shady. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kimberly was in another room giving her own statement about years of abuse she'd suffered. Gabrielle told me later that she'd brought photos from her phone showing old bruises and medical records from past ER visits. The courage it took for her to finally speak up after being terrorized for so long was incredible. Near the end of my time at the station, Lyle asked to talk to me with Lorraine present. He broke down crying and admitted he'd known for months that Kimberly wasn't his real dad. He'd overheard his parents fighting about it and had been carrying around this guilt thinking the whole thing was his fault. He kept saying if he'd never been born, then none of this would have happened. Lorraine was amazing with him, explaining that none of this was his fault and that his dad's choices were his own. Watching this kid who'd been so brave in the warehouse now falling apart from guilt he never should have carried just broke my heart completely. 2 days later, I sat in the courtroom watching them bring Kimberly in wearing orange and shackles. The prosecutor read off the charges while I gripped the bench so hard my knuckles went white. Arson, attempted murder of 3 people, witness intimidation, illegal discharge of a firearm, and more. The judge set bail at $500,000 with GPS monitoring if he made it. They seized every gun registered to him and ordered 0 contact with any of us. Eric Stanton caught me in the hallway after and said he'd arranged police patrols for Bella's place until this was over. I drove straight to her apartment, and we spent the afternoon installing new deadbolts and a camera system I'd bought that morning. She kept saying she was fine, but I saw her hands shaking when she tested the locks 3 times. The next morning, Robin called with news from the tech team about that fake video. They'd pulled the metadata and found it was created on an app called Deepfake Pro, right on Kimberly's phone at 1:52 a.m. that night. The timestamp showed he made it minutes before calling me, which destroyed his whole story about catching us together. I should have felt relief, but I couldn't stop jumping at every car door slamming outside. My hands shook when I tried to replace my car's back window that his bullet had blown out. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. thinking I smelled gas or hearing that rifle crack again. Robin saw me struggling during our meeting and gave me a card for someone who specialized in this kind of trauma. I didn't want to go, but she said it would help my testimony if I was getting treatment. Meanwhile, Gabrielle met with me at a coffee shop to go over everything one more time. She was straight with me about how I'd technically committed crimes too by entering his house and taking them without calling police first. But she said no prosecutor would charge me given what happened and the evidence we had. I told her I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant saving their lives. Lorraine had gotten Mrs. Kimberly and Lyle into a women's shelter across town with fake names. She helped transfer Lyle to a new school where nobody knew about his dad being a corrections officer who tried to kill them. The protective orders were in place, but we all knew paper didn't stop bullets if he got out. A week later, Bella came over for dinner, and we worked together putting up motion sensor lights around my house. We didn't talk much, but having her there helping made me feel less alone with all this. She made me promise not to play hero again without backup, and I agreed, even though we both knew I was lying. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about whether a corrections officer could really be guilty, or if this was all some misunderstanding. Half the neighborhood had signs supporting him, while the other half whispered about the screams they'd heard for months, but never reported. The union hired a PR firm that kept pushing stories about his service record and suggesting I had some vendetta against him. They posted old photos of him coaching Little League and helping at church events like that erased what he'd done. I had to change my phone number after getting dozens of calls from his supporters, calling me every name you could think of. But then other women started coming forward about things they'd seen. Bruises Mrs. Kimberly had tried to hide at PTA meetings, times she'd shown up with sunglasses that couldn't quite cover a black eye. The prosecutor said my testimony would be crucial when this went to trial in a few months. I told him I'd be there no matter what threats came my way, because Lyle and his mom deserved justice after everything they'd been through. Every night I'd check the locks twice and keep my bat by the bed, but at least they were safe now, and that's what mattered most. Thanks for hanging out and wondering through all of this with me. Definitely felt like a real journey together. Until we meet again, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.